The Janissaries were still the main strength of the Turkish armies. Muhammad increased their number, yet he had never more than 12,000 under arms. But when we remember to how great a degree to the other nations of that age relied on their cavalry and neglected the composition and equipment of their infantry, we can well understand the advantage which the presence of a chosen body of perfectly trained foot soldiers in the Turkish armies must have given them in pitched battles, and still more in sieges and other elaborate operations of warfare. The English and the Swiss were the only two Christian nations of that period which sent into the field a well-armed infantry, not raised from the mere rabble, but from the valuable classes of the population, and the Turkish sabre never clashed with the English bills and bows, or with the heavy halberds of Helvetia. The pay and the privileges of the Janissaries were largely augmented by the conqueror of Constantinople, and as the Turkish power was extended in Europe, care was taken to recruit that chosen corps from children who were natives of that continent rather than among the Asiatics. The levies for that purpose were generally made in Albania, Bosnia, and Bulgaria. It is said that there was seldom need to employ force in collecting the requisite number of suitable children, and that the parents were eager to obtain the enrollment of their boys in the list of Janissary recruits. This is, if true, is rather a proof of the moral depravity of the Christian population, which the Ottomans subdued, than of any mildness of the Ottomans in enforcing the institutions of Halil Chanderali. It is also stated that no compulsion was used to induce the young recruits to leave the Christian and adopt the Mohammedan faith. But this was a mere pretext or forbearance, as from the early age at which the children were selected, it would be absurd to suppose that they were free agents in following the new religious rites, and repeating the new prayers which were taught them as soon as they entered the training schools of the Janissaries. It is certain that the compulsory enrollment and conversion of youths taken in war was often practiced, as in the instance of the young Genoese nobles, who became the captives of Mohammed at the conquest of Kaffa. The attention which the Ottomans paid for their artillery and to the adoption of every improvement in military engineering must have been another great cause of their superiority to the nations, whose brave but tumultuous and ill-provided armies that encountered, nor is the care which their sultans and pashas bestowed upon what in the modern military language would be termed the ordnance and commissariat departments. Less remarkable, the Greek Chalcondylas, the contemporary of Amurath II, in his account of the Ottoman armies, after describing their number, the excellence of their organization, and the strictness in their discipline, mentions the corps that were especially employed in keeping the roads on the line of march in available condition. He speaks of the abundant supply of provisions that was always to be found in their well-arranged and symmetrical camps, and he noticed the large number of beasts of burden which always accompanied the Turkish army, and the employment of a special corps to ensure the proper transport of provisions and military stores. There was certainly no state of Christendom during the 15th or 16th century which cared for the well-being of its soldiers on such seemingly generous but truly economical principles. The campaigns of Mohammed himself, especially that against Constantinople and those of his grandson Sultan Selim, furnish many instances of the enlightened liberality and forethought with which the medieval Turks provided their soldiery with those martial instruments and adjuncts of warfare, the importance of which in order to enable an army to go anywhere and do anything. Our own great caption of the present age has so fully taught us. In examination, the political and military institutions of the Ottomans, we have been repeatedly led to notice the ziamets and the timars, the lands granted to individual subjects of the Sultan on condition of military service. The phraseology of the feudalism or medieval Christendom has generally been adopted by writers who have treated of these parts of the Turkish system, and the rare resemblance between these institutions of the East and of the West is in many respects of remarkable that the historical inquirer may at first feel surprised at feudalism failing to produce in Turkey those important effects of the progress of civilization and constitutional development which he knows to have been wrought by it in the west and center of Christian Europe. The problem offered by this variance between the results of apparently like causes is complicated and difficult. It cannot be dealt with so fully in this page as it deserves, but even the partial investigation of it, which can be undertaken here, may be of service towards acquiring a clearer discernment of many important points in the Turkish laws and usages, and in the national character of the Turks themselves. The tenures of land in Turkey will first require consideration. When the Ottomans conquered a country, the territory was divided into three portions. Part became ecclesiastical property and was devoted to pious and charitable purposes, and the maintenance of the mosques, the public schools, the hospitals, and other institutions of a similar character. The land appropriated to these purposes were called wakes or wakofs. A second part became full private property, resembling the allodial land in medieval Christendom. This property was subjected to different liabilities according to the creed of its owner. If held by a Muslim, it was called ashiri, that is to say, seizable, and the holder was obliged to pay a tithe of its produce to the state. This was the only burden attached to it. If left in the possession of a Christian, its holder paid tribute (haraj) to the state, which consisted of the capitation tax, and also of a tax levied on the estate, which was sometimes a fixed sum according to its extent, and was sometimes an impost on its proceeds, varying from an eighth to one half. The remaining part of the conquered country became domain land, including first those of which the revenues were appropriated to the state treasury or miri; second, unoccupied and waste lands, of which the amount is large in Turkey; third, the private domain of the sultan; fourth, estates and forfeited lands; fifth, the appanages of the sultan's mother and other members of the blood royal; sixth, land assigned to the offices filled by viziers; seventh, land assigned to pashas of the second rank; eighth, lands assigned to the ministers and officers of the palace; and ninth, the military fiefs, the ziamets and timars. These last formed the largest class of the domain lands, and are the objects of most interest to the student of comparative history. The smallest fief or portion of conquered land granted out to a distinguished soldier was called a timar, and generally contained from 3 to 500 acres. Each fief was to furnish in time of war and armed horsemen for each 3,000 aspers of its revenue, like the knight's fee, which was the integer of our own feudal array. The larger fiefs of Ziamets comprehended upwards of 500 acres, and there was a still higher class of fiefs, called beyliks or lordships. The general name for the holders of military fiefs was Sipahi, a cavalier, a title which exactly answers to those which we find in the feudal countries of Christian Europe. The Ziamets and the Timurs appear to have been generally hereditary in the male line. When any became vacant by failure of heirs or by forfeiture for misconduct, by Beylerbey of the district filled up the vacancy, his nomination being subjected to approval by the Porte. The higher rank of Bey and the still higher rank of Beylerbey were not at first hereditary, but were conferred by the Sultan on individuals selected by him. It was, however, usual to let the rank and estate of a Bey pass from father to son, and in later times the custom of hereditary descent grew often into a right, there being a considerable difference in this respect among the various provinces of the empire. We seem to have here before us the essential elements of the feudalism, and we might naturally expect to find a feudal aristocracy developing itself in Turkey, and arranging itself as in medieval Christendom at the expense both of the monarchy and commonalty. We shall in fact find such an aristocracy growing up to the Ottoman Empire, but not until we come to the recent century and a half of decline and corruption, which preceded the reforms of Sultan Muhammad II and of the late Sultan Abdul Majid. Such an aristocracy did not exist during the age of the Ottoman progress and splendor. The causes, the causes of its non-existence during the period are, I believe, to be principally found, first, in the high personal energies and abilities of the sultans under whom the Turkish conquests were effected and the Turkish Empire consolidated, secondly, in the existence of the Janissaries force, thirdly, in the effects of the religion of the Turks, both in the elevating the authority of the sovereign and maintaining a feeling of equality among all his Mohammedan subjects, and fourthly, in the absence of the habitual aptitude for public assemblies, which is the characteristic of nations that contain a considerable element of Germanic and Scandinavian race. It is to be remembered that the feudal system of medieval Europe was principally fashioned and matured during the reign of feeble and unsuccessful princes who were engaged in the repeated and calamitous contests not only with barbarous invaders and domestic temporal rebels, but with the bishops and the popes of their church. But let us suppose a succession of princes, such as Charlemagne and his father, to have continued among the Franks, and we shall readily understand that the haughty peers and insubordinate nobles of the 11th and 12th centuries, with their rights of private warfare, of subinfeudation, and territorial jurisdiction, would never have arisen in France. We shall still more fully realize to our minds the difference if we suppose the Frankish sovereigns to have been, like the Turkish sultans, the heads both of the church and state, and to have combined in their own persons the claims of both pope and emperor. And if we look to the history of our own country, we shall clearly see that a feudal system of baronial reforms, as well as to baronial aggrandizements, never could have grown up under successive rulers of the stamp of our Henry VIII.